Hi, this is Mik Kersten. I'm thrilled to be joining the Agile Uprising podcast and to be telling you some about the Flow framework, the project book.
Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I am once again your host, Jay Hrcsko. Joining with me, as you heard in the bumper, is our very special guest, Dr. Mik Kersten, who's here to talk about Project to Product, his most recent book. So Mik, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here, Jay. Thank you.
Thank you. So Mik, in case someone has been living under a rock or they haven't seen your book, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself and then lead us into the book that recently came out?
Absolutely. So I'm the founder and CEO of Tasktop Technologies, and I've been helping support really large, really consequential, really complex digital transformations, head towards Agile and DevOps principles and so on for the past decade. And I realized this very common failure pattern that just kept frustrating me more and more because I was seeing all these motivated people, both developers, support staff, operations staff, and so on, executives who really want to succeed, and this common reason for failure, that the way that technologists were thinking about the transformation, the things that they understood, that those didn't match the way that the business was operating and managing and measuring. And that this disconnect was, to me, becoming the root cause of these failures, because the wrong kinds of decisions were being made with wrong data, while the information was actually somewhere within the organization to make the right kinds of decisions. So I realized that we needed to get on the same page and be speaking the same language and bring the technology side and the business side together with a common framework. And that was really the goal of the book, to get people thinking differently, and then really with the goal of getting these transformations back on track, getting companies who've been around for decades or over 100 years potentially to become software innovators.
So I'm glad that you started out with get everybody on the same page, get everybody speaking the same language, because that was the thing that when I read the book, that's what jumped out at me most, right? Is so many transformations start, well, we need to get all the leaders on the boat. And then so many other transformations start as, well, we need to get all the teams on board. And again, you're still talking potato, right? There is still that chance that I'm interpreting one thing as you're interpreting another. And that was the big thing that as we on the show get into the framework, that was the thing that actually opened my eyes, is we're not speaking the same language. Going back to a previous episode we did on domain-driven design, where ubiquitous nomenclature, you're saying one thing, I'm saying another. We're not talking apples to apples, and then things get all screwy. Exactly.
And I realized it's as simple in the end, now that I've been part of some very large flow framework deployments, of coming up with the same measurement model, right? The same way of looking at the problem. If you're measuring the same thing, you're reasoning about the same way, you're seeking the same kinds of solutions for improvement, and it actually completely changes the game. So, because the other thing is, Agile language has been around, right? Why has the business not adopted it is the question. We understand the principle of DevOps. People have Accelerate and the DORA metrics and so on. Why are these things too slow to make an impact at the executive level? And then, of course, as you said, Jay, people are complaining that the executives are not getting on board, that it's a culture issue and so on. Whereas I think too often the business as a whole, the organization as a whole, has not had a chance, right? If you don't have a common measurement model, a common set of what you're measuring and how and what goals you're trying to get to, how on earth can you succeed? And the fact that so now to kind of put the blame on the technologists a little bit, if we've been telling people the story of, well, you need to understand how we measure, not how the business measures, that can be actually equally problematic, right? Because there's a reason why businesses live and die by revenue numbers or by pipeline numbers or by customer success numbers. And that's because in the end, they're responsible for delivering results to the market, results to the customer. So we somehow have to translate that into the way that we deliver things technically. And that's where I realized if we can just formalize and measure these product value streams as the primary unit, rather than these which are internal concepts like projects, which are very activity oriented and internally facing, but actually change the whole model to be customer oriented, that's really the catalyst for getting on the same page. And that's the whole goal of these product value streams. They're about delivering customer value, be that internal or external customers. And yeah, it's actually been pretty interesting to see how what seems like a fairly simple mindset, and to some ways even like an obvious mindset change, that it can have this effect of getting people going in the same direction.
And you're right, because when I think about what you said, well, let's put them a little bit later to technologists, right? Developer nerds, we come out of the woodwork and we say, oh, well, we measure X, Y, and Z, and the business is looking at us like, what are you actually talking about, right? You might as well be speaking Swahili. And then conversely, the business comes out and says, well, we measure time to market and we measure NPS, and a lot of times the technologists are looking the other way, going, well, what the hell is that? So getting everybody speaking to the same metrics, the same language, it can be very daunting. And that's, again, where the light bulb went off with me is you talk about shifting from a project-based model, right, which is typically funded along, you have X amount of time to do Y amount of budget, get as much done as you can, to actually shaking the whole organization up and reorienting on a product-based model. So the customer, a lot of Agilists will talk to the cows come home about customer, but until you shift your business, and I would be curious to see what your thoughts, until you shift your business to truly resemble that, to truly put the customer first and look at that product, your odds of success are kind of sort of middling. I mean, would you agree?
Yes, exactly. And I think, Jay, obviously you get it, but then the problem I've seen is it can actually be hard to translate those now to flip back to the other side, so the business people's perspective, they're saying we need to put the customer first. We need to deliver to the customer. We need to increase time to market. Our measure of success for customers, how much they love our stuff. And whether we measure that through Net Promoter Score or through dollars, those are really valid business measures of how much your customers love what you're delivering to them. It can be hard to translate that into daily work as a technologist. Right? Because if you're wrestling with, some problematic features or tech that's really getting in your way, that feels kind of separated from some revenue number that's been hung out there for the fiscal year. So that's where, again, I think going the other way of making sure that everyone in the organization knows how their delivery will impact a customer result is so key. So time to market, right? To the business side, it's obvious. The quicker we can get things into people's hands, the more value they will get from us, the more we'll delight our customers, which is why flow time is one of the, such an important concept in the flow framework, because everyone on the technical side can align around flow time and flow efficiency, basically everything slowing them down. And developers, operations, administrators, others, we all get frustrated when something that we just created has been sitting around for 4 weeks waiting for a security review or whatever that bottleneck is, right? So that's really the whole goal, is come up with this small, that's the whole goal of the flow metrics, right? Come up with a very small number of metrics for each value streams that everyone involved can align around improving, and then relate those to customer-centric business results that are also measured. So that we know that, well, we just added these 15 great features in the last 3 months. Did they actually move the needle for customers? And, sometimes they don't. Sometimes there's been a change in the market and we need to adapt, right? But it gets everyone rowing in the direction of the customer, and that's the key thing.
Right, rowing. Now I have that picture in mind of a crew team where everybody's rowing in a different direction and nobody can figure out why you're not going anywhere. Before you even get into the metrics, I think, Mik, you introduced the idea of flow items, right? And you break work down. Back to that ubiquitous nomenclature thread, right? You break work down into 4 buckets that are very unique, and they define the work. And you get everybody speaking the same language, and you say this is a feature versus this is a defect. And you came up with the concept, I think it was mutually exclusive and collaboratively exhaustive.
Comprehensively
exhaustive. Can you go in on that a little bit? Because at first, when I first read the 4 words daisy chain, I stopped. And I tried to, before you explained it, I tried to put it together in my head. I'm like, okay, I think he knows where he's going. But I think this could be one of those things that we're all missing in the Agile world, like breaking the work down where we have this is Y or N. And can you go in on that?
Absolutely. And so the MISI, mutually exclusive, comprehensively exhaustive, is not my concept. It's a kind of management concept that's been around for a while, but we've not really used it. So I'll pause there for a second, because I think the main thing I realized is I wanted to make sure that there was a simple common language, right? And there was a simple measure of productivity. And, again, inspired by manufacturing, where widgets everybody understands. I realized, and this, by the way, was part of my frustration with my academic career, my research career as well, is I was doing research. This is more than 10 years ago. I was doing research on software development tools. And of course, if you're doing research on that, you want to demonstrate productivity. And I realized as I was doing this, I was trying to get my PhD done, is that I had no reliable way of measuring productivity because the academics had not quite settled on it. And of course, everyone blows up every definition you come up with, like lines of code has problems, cyclomatic complexity has problems. These things get used, by the way, still, right? Then there's code commit to code deploy. Is that productivity? And I realized that academics have not quite decided or converged. In industry, we haven't converged. And if we don't actually come up with a common definition of what we're trying to deliver, we can't even have a normal representation of lean that everyone agrees on, right? If we don't know what's flowing, what the units of work are. Now, that said, as people who practice Agile, we actually do know what they are because it's the work that we're delivering is represented by the work items that we're using, whether you're using SAFe, you're using some other framework, you're a developer working on issues, you know what those units of work are. So I realized we need to connect those two worlds, right? The fact that every developer with a Kanban or a Scrum board knows what they're delivering, we somehow need to elevate those to the business. But, and this is the story of my explaining story points to our CFO who had just come on board 5 years ago, and him looking at me like I have no idea how business is and like I was crazy, realizing, okay, maybe the language we've come up with for ourselves is a little more detailed than CFOs need, and then the executives need.
I always think of that Dan McCanty quote where he says, if you don't like your job very much, march into the CFO's office and try to explain what a story point is. And I'm glad he actually, I think that's almost a verbatim quote. So it's funny, awesome. Mik, you basically just proved Daniel right by trying to do the same thing.
I've not come across that, and I wish I had 5 years ago. But maybe it's better I hadn't come across that because it was a very memorable moment for me. So I realized we actually have nailed what these things are, but they're not at the right level of abstraction for business executives, for people who truly care about output. And yet, if you look at lean manufacturing, there was a common business level understanding of a value stream, a product value stream, and what flows through it. So I just thought, okay, we need, even though the practice of building things is much different in creative work like software versus in manufacturing, we actually need to get on the same page about what these units of work are. And that's the 4 flow items. And then it took me a couple of years to actually come up with what the small set is by looking at our implementations, at over 300 customer implementations, at all of the work item types that are being adopted in SAFe and so on, and say, okay, we can take these 4 and they'll represent all work. And of course, then I had to struggle with the fact that there's different decompositions, right? Of visible versus invisible work, architecture work, internal work. There've been so many different attempts at decomposing these things. I want to make sure that we were able to cover them all, but from a customer pull perspective, because so much of how we've decomposed these work items are in terms of how we need to get things done, which again, I think is why in so many of the Agile frameworks, we've not elevated these key concepts to a business construct sufficiently. Right? Security risks tended to be off to the side. Governance and compliance tends to be off to the side. It's been coming up a lot more lately. Tech debt, there's enablers and there's all those kinds of work items. But again, they're too in the weeds. And I thought, okay, these are the 4 that need to be escalated to the entire organization as what's being pulled through a value stream. And with the lens of customer pull and of the fact that they're trade-offs, they're a zero-sum game. You do more of one, you do less of the other. Because that's why I fundamentally realized technologists got that the business didn't, is that when your team's about to, and I got to live this, I think many of us who ship software worldwide got to live this, if you're gonna do a bunch of regulation work, like for GDPR as we had to, it's gonna mean you get a few less features done. If you're getting a bunch more features done, you're going to probably take on some more technical debt and so on. So again, that really, for anyone who's built software, that really intuitive trade-off of if I do more of this, I do less of that, that was the aha moment for me, is like, wow, that's what these organizations have no clue of. They have no way of modeling that. They have no way. And then I thought, wait a second, I've never, in all the project plans I've reviewed at large organizations, out of curiosity, I've never seen tech debt reduction
right
as a key phase of the project lifecycle, right? Because it's not thought of as a part of the calculus when all you're tracking is activities rather than tracking what you actually should be delivering.
Right.
So that was the genesis of the flow items. And those are really the core of the flow framework, is all work is represented by these four things, no matter how you decompose them. And the business needs to understand all four. The business needs to understand if you've got a fast feature push, you'll bring on tech debt, you have to pay it down, or you'll bankrupt the product value stream and get no more features out later.
Right.
So that was really the goal.
And that to me, that was one of the MISI was one of my first aha moments. The next aha moment is when you start to get into the actual metrics themselves and you talked about flow distribution. Now, I know this is starting to come up in like the SAFe LPM courses, they call it capacity. Mick, this blew my mind, right? The idea that I could show a product owner, right, who was typically somebody from the business to say, look, here's what we've worked on for the last sprint. Like you just said, we had 10 stories, we had 10 features, 6 of which were all new features. We delivered 10 widgets, 6 of which were new features, 4 of which were enablers. If I continue along that path, you see what's going to happen. My tech debt is going to grow to a point where, like you said, I've evolved into what amounts to an evolutionary dead end for the product. I can't do anything without a massive rewrite. Yeah. And the idea of getting, like you said earlier, where we're talking in different languages. The business doesn't necessarily understand technical debt. We, as software engineers, as coming from development shops, we intrinsically get that. But to be able to visualize it and have, I think you called it flow distribution, right? Yes. Which is for every increment, I can tell you the work that I did, work with gratuitous air quotes, what bucket that hit it, and then you have the historical trending. You could get a better picture, especially for the business who's so worried about, I throw IT money, they take forever, they come back, I don't want it. That's been the typical knock on us. You can then tell them, look, you're in the driver's seat. If you want me to work on all new features, I'm eventually going to put myself in a dead end. Like you brought up GDRP. I was in the banking business when the Credit Card Act came out in the States, and it put a giant cold bucket of water on everything. Everybody stopped because we were all so busy doing that stuff. And then the banks that were able to get through the legalese quicker were the ones that were able to introduce new products quicker. Ergo, they became more successful. So Mick, let me ask you this. Is flow distribution the Rosetta Stone in joining the business and IT? Is it really that simple that if I get everybody on the same page, talking the same language, and look at this, does it translate everything else?
Yeah, so I'm happy to say that it looks like the answer is yes. I think we'll need more time, but I have absolutely seen it over and over now in the last, the book's been out for a year. These deployments have been happening for longer than that of the flow framework at these organizations. It, I think more than anything, forces the organization to get on the same page, as you're saying, Jay, because you can't, again, once it's that clear, that's explicit, and that simple, there's only 4 of these things. You do more of one, you do less of the other. It forces the right kind of decision making. And it all, by the way, it all came from the kind of thinking that you have, right? Is that when I was analyzing these product value streams with all these organizations, and in my own organization as well, we all know that you can always see the pass flow distribution. It's always there. You can look at it, and we started actually visualizing it. And then, of course, again, to people who've been kind of steeped in Agile, it's obvious that if you're going to take on all this work, you'll do less of this other kind of work. And I actually noticed really good product and engineering leaders would map out releases, not just as features, the way people think releases are mapped out, but okay, after this initial 1.0, we're going to have less capacity for new features. And then we'll hire, but the ramp up will be too slow. The tech debt will have to be taken down because the last 9 months, we've obviously taken more on. And I realized this calculus in their head was actually quite simple. It's just that no one on the business, it was never exposed to anyone on the business side. So that was really the whole goal, to take that simple math out of flow distribution and open it up to the whole organization. So.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. As soon as I hit that point in the book, I was yelling and everybody would listen. Look, we need to do this. And somebody made some asinine remark about, we'll update Jira with another drop down. I'm like, you're losing the forest for the trees. But I really do think that to me was the big idea that set the alarm off, was if we get everybody speaking the same language and you get a product owner who everybody is yelling as part of a transformation, it needs to come from the business. It needs to come from the business. Yeah. So they're not necessarily as steeped in like the nerdery. I hate to keep maligning my own career, but whatever. If they're not as steeped in that sort of terminology, they may not necessarily get it. So Mick, let's go into the framework itself, right? And very early on in the book, you introduce it. It's very elegant. I won't say simple in an insulting way. It's simple in the fact that I can look at it and say, okay, I'm pretty sure without reading this book, I think I know where he's going, and then you talk us through it. So Mik, can we start ourselves at the bottom and work our way up with talking us through the framework itself, like how you have your different layers, and especially I really want to talk about, I want to spend a little time on the indexes, because I think that is where a lot of, in my history, in my career, I think that's where some of my transformations have gone off the rails. It's the inability to tie the what's the British one, chalk to cheese. I know apples and oranges. How do I tie those two together?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, and I think that's a great topic to focus on, because those are, I didn't describe them enough, I feel like, in the book. I think there's more to do there, and to me, they're absolutely critical to start measuring. So the bottom line is, I think one of the bottom of the flow framework, right, where you've got the tool network. This to me is just a really important thing to understand, because so often I heard business people or senior technologists say, well, it's too hard. The work we do is not visible. It's not like making cars. It's not like making widgets. But then again, as a developer, I was like, well, no, it's all visible. Every single thing I ever created or contributed or commented on is all in a tool repository somewhere, right? All the research I did was mining those tool repositories. So the amazing thing is just how rich the bottom layers that is the tool network, how rich the tool network is in terms of describing information, having the information you need to understand flow distribution, and so on. But in companies that are really effective, you'll actually see this tool networks connected, which means you don't have these massive silos or these islands. You actually have flow and connectivity between tools. So if a ticket comes in, developers find out about it, not over a spreadsheet, not over just a link on Slack, but they actually get the full context they need. There might be a stack trace, there might be something else into their tool, or they have access to the other tool. So you've got this connectivity. So that's why the connectivity index of the tool network is so key, because if you need information to flow across all the different specialists, roles, and tools that you've got in the organization. So now once you've connected that tool network, you've got that, right? It's like you've connected the production line on the plant. Then this to me is the most amazing thing. If you ever, I did a whole bunch of research doing visualizations of this. Once you can get that data from those tools and look at it in a more generic way, in a more abstract way, through the flow items, rather than through 60 different issue types, which I'll recognize in some organizations, not in others. These things are really highly customized to legacy, to what people have worked, or where they are in their transformations, and so on. But once we can extract from that, or really create this integration model and pull out the flow items, you can actually start seeing how collaboration flows. And so you can start seeing, for example, what the flow distribution is for this product value stream versus that one, right?
Right.
You can start seeing, and the most amazing things always to me you can start seeing flow efficiency issues, which is where those flow items wait.
Right.
And it's always fascinating to actually, once you start measuring that activity network, which is again, where all collaboration, all communication, all creativity, all coding happens, all design happens, you actually start seeing the flow of work, right? You're seeing software delivery, and you can see it live. We've done these long replays of like 10 years of an open source repository, right? You can actually see how leaders form through this flow of work, because more of the flow items will be attached to them. And we did some really fascinating things. We could predict who would become the next leader of an open source project, for example.
Wow.
All these super cool things. So that's the really thing. The data's there. It just needs to be connected and modeled into the flow items so you can represent it and visualize it easily. And then on top of that, you can actually create a value stream network. So this is where you say, okay, this is how all these flows need to align to customer value. Right? This is the business customer facing products. These are our shared services. And you'll see in this, in this value stream network that you've got all of these, let's say, features waiting on this API that needs to be implemented. And it might be from 4 different customer facing products. And this API is missing, or this data pipeline is missing, or this, customer data model is missing. And when you see all those wait states, you realize, oh, well, we have not created the right product value streams. We're missing, or we've understaffed or underinvested in this internal API. We need to put more resources there, not more resources on the business-facing product value stream, because they'll just, do their work around.
Clog the pipe even more. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the key thing about that value stream network. And that's, by the way, that alignment index is how much of it is aligned to these customer flows, so you can actually reason the right way about where the weak states are and where to invest. Because we know, for example, from looking at the value stream networks of a tech company, they invest very heavily in internal platforms and APIs and shared services. Most enterprises, they over-focus completely on the external customer product, even though their bottlenecks, chances are lower down internally. Mm-hmm. So this is the beauty of it, is once you start seeing it and measuring it, you're making these decisions with data. You're not trying to, and this is, by the way, this is a failure mode I've noticed that's been interesting in the last year of deployments of the flow framework. Is the organization tries to define its product value streams top down over, basically boil the ocean, here are our product value streams. You don't even know what all the internal ones are until you start measuring it, right? You don't know where you should prioritize transformation, because you might be okay actually leaving that one a bit more waterfall for the next year, while you truly have to get your, internal platforms invested in and supporting all those business applications.
Right. The cornerstone, the substrate actually becomes the data, which is the work itself, right? You're not, like you said, it is a typical, and I've seen it in 2, if not 3 transformations personally, where you send a bunch of people off into a room and they come out and, hey, here's all of our value streams. Yep. And again, at that point, somebody has usually paid a consultant a lot of money to come out with that result. And nobody wants to be the one to say the emperor has no clothes. So right, wrong, or indifferent, they end up married to it. And we can go on to all incentives and how people work and all that, where they shift the focus. But then you end up married to it, where in actuality, if you start from the simplest thing of tying a piece of work together, like I've seen organizations where things go from Unicenter, like you said, to an Excel spreadsheet, to a Jira ticket, to an ALM artifact, there's a requirements document in there somewhere, there's an architectural document that's updated. So tying those artifacts together and getting a through line, like a string, and then you have that traceability, you have the connectivity, you have all that. It allows you to build and see, to your point, where are my constraints? Where is that giant bottleneck that I'm not thinking of because I'm putting all my money over here and not over here, that's going to end up hanging me out to dry later?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's really the whole of the flow framework, is to allow you the sort of conceptual model to measure and see that. And you might start with 3 or 4 product value streams, because again, there are going to be some really interesting surprises in terms of what the bottom line is, how misaligned your product value streams are to your customers and business, because they've never been measured this way. So they are misaligned, or at least I've not seen them not be misaligned. Not to mention, it's a continual improvement journey to actually continue to realign them and to look at where more investments needed. So we can't treat the definition of these product value streams in the product portfolio as a large enterprise architecture exercise that you can do up front in a vacuum. It's got to be done with data, and it's got to be done with the data that is being created every day by our agile teams. So, and that's exactly the goal, is the flow framework gives you a lens on that, so that you for the first time see this at the business level and can help the business make these incremental investment decisions accordingly. So.
And if you're consistently concentrating on flow, the definition of flow of work through my system, your value streams as an extension will naturally come out, right? As you're looking at the work, you'll naturally see that, okay, well, here's a value stream that's hitting a particular customer and we're not flowing through to them. So let's look at that one. Okay, well, now we fix that one. The other part of that is the idea of the evolutionary dead end, right? Where we have a product where eventually it's going to come to end of life because we've experimented enough in the marketplace and we realize that we really need to go left now, not right. So let's graciously transition this way. And if we've maintained our tech debt and we don't have things too tightly coupled, it becomes an almost elegant exercise. Whereas a lot of companies, the idea of even killing something, right? Typically I end up replacing Mik Kersten ink with Jay Hrcsko ink, and I have to go through a giant ERP and a request for proposal, and I sign a contract and all this sort of stuff. That idea, what's the word I'm looking for? I hate to say agility, but that adaptability almost at an organizational level to understand that sometimes we have to change direction is huge. And the data and the insights give that a mirror to look back at without being able to say, well, I can tell you my gut says this. It's just numbers, right? It's just numbers of work flowing through the system.
Exactly. And to your point previously, evolutionary dead ends, right? Sometimes we can't work our way out. We were in a situation at Tasktop where our previous generation product, Tasktop Sync, built on some Eclipse technologies, we realized was an evolution dead end. For us to unwind that tech debt was not feasible. So we actually had to re-platform, and we did, and it was the right decision, right? Sometimes the dead ends are or because of the market. There's some competitor that's moved in. Let's move our resources elsewhere. But this is this fallacy that project management, the amount of information it assumes on technology, technological platforms, the market is just not realistic. We can't plan 2 years out. We have to define these product value streams with a set of goals and a roadmap. Then again, measure and adjust and understand when something does need to get killed. Because the other key thing about understanding, and this is just Donald Reiner's concept of product development flow, is that you're looking at the whole life cycle of the product, right? There's no project end date on a product. This is why tech companies are so good at killing products that are not sustainable for the future, whereas projects and support and maintenance, notions of support and maintenance never die. So
that is and I think you're right, that is a fundamental failing of when you look at project management as an isolated window. Is Mik and I are working on a project. When the project is done, it doesn't just go off into the ether and self-support itself until it dies, right? Something is eventually going to break. Somebody's eventually going to want an enhancement. And that is not something, if you're continuously looking at that project model, if you're looking at a silo of Q1 2020, Q1 2021, Q1, if you're looking in that, you're creating that, that mental silo, you're going to end up painting yourself into a corner.
Exactly.
It's just what's going to happen. So, Mik, you mentioned Tasktop. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, can you give our listeners a bit of idea about what Tasktop is?
Yeah. So we're at this stage of the game, we exist to help organizations implement the flow framework and get their digital transformations on track and get their agile and DevOps transformations on track. So we do that at the various levels of the flow framework. So at the bottom, we've got the Tasktop Hub product, which allows you to connect all these various tools like the ones that you mentioned. So you get end-to-end feedback and flow. And then DevOps Enterprise Summit, we did a sort of limited availability announcement of a new product called Tasktop Viz that gives you flow metrics. So, and of course, we've got coaches and people who provide thought leadership and sessions and so on to help get organizations thinking the right way. So we're just basically trying to support this shift, again, to these end-to-end product value streams. And really, I think you touched on this as well, Jay, shift the industry from thinking that you can do one value stream mapping exercise and you're done to realizing, no, you actually need to implement these and model these product value streams on top of whatever your tool chain is today, whatever it's evolving into later, and track and measure flow. So that's really, my whole mission right now is to do that. And of course, with that, we're learning so much through the data that's coming in, right? We're learning, it's been amazing to me. One of the biggest learnings through all the deployments of Tasktop Viz has been flow load is really killing a lot more value streams than I expected. So too much work in progress. I was wondering if there'd be other larger sources of low flow efficiency, so too much wait states, but it's been very interesting how when organizations go through their transformations, I mean, for me, the counterintuitive learnings are the most interesting ones, right?
Right.
When you're shifting from waterfall to agile, it's actually very easy to get into a state where you're completely overloading those new, at the business level, overloading those new agile projects to the point where they're getting less out. So again, we get it, it's kind of obvious, WIP's been talked about for years, but the cool thing about the flow framework, and then of course our commercial solutions around it, is that you can then go to the business side and say, look, if you're giving us this much stuff to do at once, we're going to get a lot less done, about this much less done, than if we actually come to an agreement of what a reasonable capacity for flow is on this value stream. You've actually got data to show to the business, because in the end, everyone should have the same goal of delivering as much value as you can over a longer period of time. But the way that requirements or features tend to get dropped on agile teams is again, this overly short-term thinking in terms of, get all this stuff done as quickly as you can. Right.
It's the WIP is the ultimate anchor, the ultimate killer, and nobody realizes it until it's too late. Right. The example I've used with a up and coming Scrum Master is you're married, right? Yeah, I just got married. How do you feel when your wife asks you to do one thing and then asks you to do another, and then asks you to do another, and then asks you to do another? How do you feel? He said, dude, I lose my mind. Like, I can't get anything done. I'm trying to do 10 things at once, and I'm doing a crappy job on all 10 things at once. And I stopped and I went, how do you think your Agile team feels when you keep dropping stories on them? And you literally, you could hear the gears crank, and then the light bulb went on. He was like, oh, shit, you're right. I said, that's exactly it, right? Slow down. It's all the Reinerson stuff, and Troy McGinnis, and Dan McCandy. Slow down the speed up. It's just, it makes best sense.
And then, so that's been fascinating. Then, of course, this other key one But again, the really interesting thing is, and this is where, I mean, Tasktop has been this amazing learning tool, is that's happening. Even, I was expecting a lot, like you would have, Jay. It's happening more than I expected. And then, of course, it's exacerbated by the fact that a whole bunch of the work is not visible or properly tracked, because tech debt tends not to be properly tracked and is not visible at all. So when the team or a set of teams has to go through a bunch of tech debt reduction, it just actually looks like they're not getting anything done, which is wrong, right? Because, of course, only tracking. We did this, by the way. The company plan a while back was only measured in terms of features. Right? But if we're doing that, and then of course that was that, by the way, for one of our product value streams was the year that GDPR came out. So that was a pretty quick lesson to learn, is sometimes, of course, in the end, all that we care about is how much value we deliver for users. So you're always tracking the feature velocity. But if you over-calibrate on that, you create the wrong kind of incentive to either penalize people for doing the right things, which is get more risk work done. Or you could have some major learnings on security during the course of a year, because some frameworks you depend on just had a whole bunch of vulnerabilities uncovered, right? That we need to have those agile concepts go end to end, where we can, of course, pivot to that within or between release cycles, and have the whole company realize the value of that, not just be disappointed that fewer features are getting done.
Right, and you just made an interesting point where you talked about we can have a lot of learnings about security. If we have a platform that's maybe old or outmoded or having problems with patching, it will show up when you have everything tied together in those indexes that, hey, we're slowing down, we're spending a lot of time on security, and then you root cause analysis to find out, oh, it's the J app, right? It's too old, it needs to be replaced. So then you can, again, it's like you said, it's the visibility, it's the having everybody look at it, have all the work being made on the table so you can see what's being prepared. You can then say, okay, well, now we realize we need to dig in here, because this is something that we really is going to prevent us from getting forward evolution in the future. Exactly.
And again, having everyone recognize the value of that work, that's the whole point of those flow items. So.
Perfect. So, Mik, we're just about done. So I want to ask you, what's next? What's next on the horizon for you? I know there's always, you can only share so much, but what's coming around the horizon for the Flow framework, Tasktop? What do you have going on?
Yeah, so the biggest thing for me right now is just continuing to do these larger and larger deployments, and getting the measurement and the learnings with the business and technology leaders that I get to work with, in terms of what's working, where the bottlenecks are, and doing that based on data coming in, into the tool, so that, again, that can inform the investment and transformation strategy. So the main thing I'm just completely obsessed with right now is just accelerating how quickly and how easily these transformations can be scaled by using the data to inform the decisions. Because it has been amazing to me how motivated, people like yourselves, like your audience, are to make this happen, right? So that Rosetta Stone, whatever we call it, right? That notion of flow distribution and measuring and tracking flow, it's working. And getting as many organizations as possible, getting the benefits of that, it's everything. That's all I'm focused on right now.
All right. Well, Mik, if people want to find you going forward, they want to find out more information about the Flow framework, obviously we'll link to the book, a link to your website in the show notes. Someone wants to get in touch with you, they want to get some more information, where do they go?
Yeah, so the book, or or just Google for Project to Product. If you want to hit me up, LinkedIn is the easiest way. And yeah, would love to continue the discussions. So
awesome. Well, Mik, on behalf of all of our audience, I really want to thank you for taking your time out today. On behalf of Mik and myself, I want to thank our audience for sitting through yet another exciting episode. We were going to have threads on this on the coalition. We'll be in the Discord server. We'll be all over Twitter. So please jump in and continue the conversation. Once again, Mik, thank you very much. And on behalf of the Agile Uprising, this is Jay signing us out.